quality of a Fire Emblem map can be separated into 5 different factors. Flavor, how well the map matches the story and atmosphere that it is trying to portray, and whether or not it succeeds at making you feel like you're really experiencing the story as the developers intended. Objective, what the map is asking you to do in order to finish the chapter, be it seizing, routing, escaping, or defending. Is it offering you an objective that is interesting to work towards? Replayability, you finished the chapter, now how do you feel about it? Frustrated? Relieved? Satisfied? There's any number of possible outcomes that can occur after finishing a chapter, so consider whether or not you'd enjoy playing the chapter again on a subsequent playthrough. Difficulty. Difficulty might not be an important factor for everyone, but a fair amount of players yearn to be challenged by Fire Emblem, to be given a puzzle to solve with the resources provided. Was the map that you just finished difficult in a compelling way? Enjoyability. Plain and simple, is the map fun to play? Are you having a good time whilst playing it, and if so, are you able to articulate exactly why the map is so stimulating? When all of these variables are managed effectively, what you're left with is an incredibly satisfying chapter to play through, providing a memorable experience for the player that they'll hopefully be excited to enjoy again during a second playthrough. And if you don't pay attention to this formula, what you're given is some of the worst the series has to offer. My name's Blute. Welcome to F.O.R.D.E. And welcome back to another episode of F.O.R.D.E. It's been 5 weeks since you looked at me, but now I'm back with the same amount of enthusiasm and vibe in my voice. Real talk, I hope you guys had a wonderful October and are currently having an exhilarating November, because Lord knows I am. I, for one, am thoroughly excited to get back into the swing of things with none other than an FE3 map. And if you're wondering why I decided to use FE3 instead of New Mystery, it's because I legitimately think FE3 both plays and looks better than FE12. I much prefer it in terms of gameplay and in aesthetic. Also, Chris is not in FE3, so it makes FE3 automatically better than New Mystery. That's not a hot take, I'm pretty sure most people will agree with me on that. Regardless, we're going to be talking about Chapter 8 of Book 2, so let's get right into the categories, shall we? Starting off with Flavor. Flavor is definitely the chapter's strongest category, as the main thing that the map is trying to evoke is this overwhelming feeling of, well, being overwhelmed. It's kind of as simple as that, there's really no other way to put it. I guess there's another sensation too, but we'll get into that in a little bit. For starters, up to this point, you've been progressing through each of the chapters whilst feeling as though your army was acting as the underdog, so to say, as you are greatly outclassed when it comes to promoted units. It is absolutely no secret that both Mystery and New Mystery absolutely adore to throw hordes of promoted flyers at you. I feel like the most common enemy type in this game is probably Draco Knights. There are Draco Knights in basically every single early game chapter. For fuck's sake, there's Draco Knights as early as Chapter 2! And while it can definitely become a bit of a slog gameplay-wise, I actually think it does wonders for the game's flavor, as it really makes it feel as though the enemy is throwing everything they've got at you in order to stamp you out once and for all, rather than just like playing it tame by throwing crappy unit types like soldiers and armor knights at you. I mean, they still do throw armor knights and soldiers at you, but they're like in limited quantity compared to the actual good unit types, like your cavaliers and your paladins and your generals and your Draco Knights and some such. And this is really exemplified in chapters like 5, 7, and this one, through the use of characters like George and Astrum. I never know how to pronounce George, I'm just gonna call him normal. That J is doing heinous amounts of damage to my psyche. Either way, both of these previously playable units are now acting as generals for the Arcanair army, boasting like pretty impressive stats for this part of the game, and more importantly, they are boasting a squad of fully promoted and equipped units to back them up, presenting them as a genuine threat, not for the player to overcome, but to act as a warning sign, telling the person playing that they should absolutely be afraid of the foes that they are encountering. This creates a really peculiar situation overall. As for me, I'm absolutely inspired by FE3's early game. When it comes to how its story is presented, I actually really fucking like FE3's early game story. It's one of my favorites. Legitimately love it. But its gameplay, yeah, I absolutely despise it. In terms of gameplay, FE3's early game is legitimately one of my least favorite Fire Emblems. That's a different kind of worms. When we're in flavor, it's a completely different planet. So the way that it presents this great feeling of mystery, nudge nudge wink wink, is actually really well done when it's portrayed through the story. Some nice gameplay story integration. And it all comes together so elegantly in what's effectively the end game for the early game with Soulful Bridge. Mystery of the Emblem commonly throws enemies that are way too strong for you to handle properly. So they encourage the player to tiptoe around them in order to enhance the chapter's flavor. Similar to how Garneth works in Oasis of Magic. Just having a big old, danger zone, do not enter this area. Trespassers will be violated. And the way F.O.R.D.E is presented in Soulful Bridge is done so wonderfully, being shown as just this massive, brick shithouse of a unit with capped stats, a holy weapon, and something that literally makes him invincible with the Dark Sphere, which honestly kind of undercuts the whole thing. That's my one complaint with how F.O.R.D.E is presented in Soulful Bridge, is the Dark Sphere is a little bit overkill. I get it, it's the reason he's invincible overall. It's certainly not because he has capped stats in every area and you wouldn't be able to kill him anyway. He very much acts as the Lu Bu of the game, if you're familiar with Dynasty Warriors. Being this Goliath of a unit who you're going to need the entire rest of, the experience to build up towards in order to stand a chance. And I think it's done really effectively. One final note, and I think this is the reason I admire this chapter's flavor so much, but I love that this is the very first time that you actually see F.O.R.D.E in FE3. You've seen F.O.R.D.E in FE1, you see his turban, you see his wacky mustache, it's oh, I like this guy, he's a cab with pretty good stats, I like him, he's a cool dude. When you get to Mystery of the Emblem, F.O.R.D.E has only been mentioned by characters like Lang and George. Without any notion that he's really changed physically, it's more that he's changed mentally. It's oh, what's going on with F.O.R.D.E? He's making these out-of-character decisions. So without any prior knowledge, you'd kind of assume that he looks basically the same as he did in Shadow Dragon. But when you get to see him for the first time in Chapter 8, and you see that he's now this crimson-clad general, because Kaga decided that someone needs to get cucked, it's a really, devastating revelation. It really encapsulates, this sensation of surprise and confusion that Mystery of the Emblem is so constantly trying to evoke, and I think it does it pretty well for the most part, but it does it, hammer on the nail perfectly in this chapter. Yeah, nothing but positives for flavor. Absolute A+. Give it an S rank, fuck it. It's perfect. I love the flavor in Soulful Bridge. Now, moving on to Objective. Objective is kind of a tricky category this time around. More so than any of the others, now that I'm thinking about it. As always, FE3 is part of that delightful group of Fire Emblems in which the main objective is literally never going to change. It's Seize, and you better get used to it. Although I will give the chapter a little bit of credit where it's due before we go any further. The objective feels closer to Escape rather than Seize, due to the time limit placed on the dangerous enemy units deciding to move. It makes the map feel a little bit different to your traditional Seize Fiesta, and it gives it a little bit of spice. Not like an exotic spice or something interesting to go, whoa, this is making my mouth explode with flavor. It's like salt on your french fries. It's still pretty basic. But while there isn't too much to keep the player interested in regards to the main objective, I'd say the chapter does keep it pretty fresh through its side objectives. No, I can't. Throw an asterisk on that. Just throw a big old asterisk on that. It feels weird to call the large groups of, heroes and generals side objectives, as your objective is to generally just avoid them if you possibly can. If you want to keep your main force alive and breathing, you do not want to engage that giant pod of units at the bottom of the map. So it's kind of strange to classify that as a side objective when the optimal way of playing, or the optimal way of engaging the side objective, is to ignore it. But I guess I'd still classify it as a side objective. It makes it so your positioning is a little bit more important than normal. Or at least it would be if stepping into the movement range of the heroes actually aggroed them. I'm talking about the FE3 version of the map. I haven't played FE12 in a very long time, so maybe it does in FE12. Whoopee! I don't care. So I'm 99% sure that that is not the case in FE3. Entering the movement range of the heroes. I can't see movement ranges in FE3 because I'm fucking blind and counting from 1 to, I believe, 8. Heroes have 8 move or something. That's far too much effort. Regardless, I'm pretty sure that isn't the case in which stepping into the movement range actually aggroes them. So the actual objective comes off feeling a little bit half-finished. I think it's cool that when Harden gives the order from, I think, turn 6 for them to charge directly at you, I think that's neat and a good sign for the player to go, or like, good sign from the devs to the player to go, hurry the fuck up, come on, seize that throne. But it's likely that you're probably done with the rest of the map at that point, so it's more of a threatening story beat rather than something gameplay related to like actually challenge the player. I want to give this chapter a pass for objective, because I like I've said, I love its flavor to pieces. But outside of the literal single thief, who doesn't even really have any good loot to secure in the first place, it's literally just a Firestone for Bantu and I guess Tiki when she shows up. Other than that, Soulful Bridge is just a very basic chapter with some big, like, they're basically no-no zones, just big red blocks of don't enter scattered across the map that you shouldn't interact with. Like, it's more just a semi-interactive attraction that you'd find in a museum. It's like, oh, look, there's Astrum. He was the hero of Arcanea. If you press this red button, he'll say his famous catchphrase. Fucking click. I'm the strongest man in Arcanea. And then if you find Astrum's battle quote starting, you'll also hear the sound of your Super Famicom restarting. Yes, my super legal Super Famicom. Yeah, sorry, there just isn't enough here. I'm gonna give objective a fail. I'd love to give it a success, but it's like a half and half, but like a 60-40 in terms of failure to success. It's almost there. And replayability, man. After like showering this chapter with praise in regards to its flavor, it's kind of depressing to go through the other categories and be like, it's not that great. Unfortunately, as for replayability, there really isn't that much to look forward to on a repeat playthrough. As I've mentioned with chapters like Mother and Daughter, it is absolutely acceptable to have chapters that are mostly dedicated to just advancing the plot or conveying themes through gameplay, acting as a very nice set piece for the player rather than something that is truly engaging and giving them something that they'll immediately want to play again. It's totally fine to do that. Every single Fire Emblem has chapters like this. However, you've also got to be prepared for the fact that these chapters will give the player very little incentive to experiment with them, as there simply isn't that much to play around with. It's a very, like, basic setup. In fact, Soulful Bridge's replayability is hindered even further by the fact that the map is directly reused from Shadow Dragon. I'm pretty sure the map is actually removed from Book 1, but, like, the point still stands that it's relatively likely that the player is already familiar with the map. Like, I imagine there's very few people who've played, like, Book 2 but haven't played Shadow Dragon, so to say, considering it's a direct sequel. So they'll likely know how to exploit the map's weaknesses, even if the starting positions are altered from starting in the top right to starting in the center. The reality is that you're probably just going to go through the traditional motions of placing your tankiest units to fend off the relatively strong paladins and generals coming from the top side of the map, and if it really comes to it, probably sending Parla down to the lower end of the map to make sure that the onslaught of heroes doesn't just run the rest of your army over. Now that I'm thinking about it, this honestly describes a good chunk of FE3 maps. Just letting Parla deal with 80 to 90% of the threats because she's stronger than your Jagan, and also the guy who's just your Jagan but better. Man, Aran got it rough. Fucking imagine getting replaced by just a strictly better version of you, and then also just effectively getting replaced by a non-promoted unit who has better stats and better growth than you, and can fly! Parla's not fair, man. That unit is fucking busted. Either way, there's not a whole lot to go on replayability-wise. Strats will likely remain the same, unit selection won't vary that much, since you know, you're still somewhat early on in the game, like you might like field a Castor or a Ryan here and there, but it's mostly the same. And outside of forgetting that George can't be recruited by Marth in FE3, like I did, which was a fun revelation, there won't be many surprises. Fail for replayability. Our fourth category, difficulty. When I'm talking about difficulty here, I don't want to hear any complaints about how the lunatic version of this chapter is actually the most intricately designed piece of difficulty that's ever existed, or whatever. I'm talking about the FE3 version, and the FE3 version isn't especially difficult. The only realistic challenge that this chapter can offer the player is in the form of the previously mentioned big, flashing danger zones. Do not enter, lest you succumb to death. These zones filled with heroes and generals, and even the generals aren't really that dangerous. You can probably just mulch through them with your palace-shaped death object. FE3 enemy quality in general really isn't that spectacular, so the majority of the other enemies won't be posing that much of a threat to your army. Even your weaker units should be okay to take a hit or two. I'm pretty sure, even units such as Marisha or... I'm pretty sure even Wendell can take a hit. That old man's surprisingly bulky. Furthermore, maybe I've just conditioned myself at this point, but if I see a fort in Mystery or New Mystery or New Mystery, I'm covering that thing as soon as humanly possible. Pretty much every single chapter in the game has reinforcements just flying out of forts like babies flying out of wombs. I fucking hate it. So if I see a 4, I'm covering it. I'm not taking any chances. That's conditioning at its peak. So outside of the unit quality, it'll really just come down to playing as quickly as you need to in order to avoid the dreaded turn 6 of everyone in the Tri-County area bum rushing you. Which really isn't that difficult, especially since you got Fina in the last chapter to remind you just how fucking busted dances are for efficiency. The side objectives are sparse, the enemies aren't strong, there really isn't that much going on, the chapter isn't very long, so I can't reasonably give this a pass, unfortunately. Man, 3 failures for a chapter I like. Let's go ahead and end it off with everyone's favorite category, enjoyability. The category where I say, well, I like it, therefore it's good, and we all go home. Spoilers. That's probably going to be the reality for this episode as well. Enjoyability will almost always just be an opinion piece, and I still have fun playing this chapter. Even if the map is repeated like 4 times across different games at this point, like what, you'll play it in FE1, you'll play it in this book 2, you'll play it in Shadow Dragon Remake, and you'll play it in New Mystery. Whew, that's rough. Either way, it doesn't offer a whole lot in enjoyability. So I think the reason why I enjoy it as much as I do is just how well it works as the final chapter for early game. I've been thinking a lot recently about how early, mid, and late game is separated in between games, and how each game has different numbers of chapters before you move on to the next category. For example, I feel like Mystery of the Emblem starts with chapter 1, shocker, and the early game continues up to the end of chapter 8, this one. Whereas something like Awakening has a far longer early game, in my opinion, continuing all the way up to chapter 11. Moreover, some games feel like they can get kind of nebulous with when these periods are supposed to end, but I think FE3 does a masterful job at revealing your overarching antagonist for the first time, and forcing the player to flee in fear of his grand mustache. And I really appreciate just how, kind of sad the chapter can feel overall. I'm a really big fan of Harden and how he's portrayed in FE3. Obviously it's a very simple plot of my wife is cucking me and, fucking wizard Satan appeared with a dark orb to corrupt me. But, I actually do like that. They took a, reasonably good character from FE1 and turned him into the villain. Watching what was once a stalwart ally fall to such lows is just... it's good stuff. It's it's tragic storytelling. I like it a lot. It's great stuff, and the gameplay is reasonable enough to the extent that I really enjoyed this chapter on my most recent run-through. I'm going to go ahead and give enjoyability a pass. And that is going to wrap it up for this episode. Only 2 out of 5 categories were a pass, but I'd say all of the fail categories weren't, massive disasters. They were mostly just a bunch of small, weaker areas that accumulated into the chapter not being that exceptional on the gameplay front. However, unlike something like Mother and Daughter, which definitely succeeds on the story front, this chapter doesn't feel like an absolute slog to play through. It's tense, there's constant story beats in an otherwise, pretty story-light game, and it kept my attention in this hellish landscape that we call 2025. So I'd call it a good chapter overall. That could definitely use some improvements here and there. Now, in regards to our anagram, believe it or not, we're still doing anagrams because they're the new hit thing! Trust me, everyone. The game will be Awakening if you've been keeping up. It's the last game that we haven't done a map from, so I'll just go ahead and spoil that for you now. But I won't tell you the exact chapter. No. You'll have to figure it out by deducing its true name from Lodges Confine. If you didn't hear it in the back, Lodges Confine. Alright, that's going to wrap it up for me for this episode. I will catch you guys next time, and I hope y'all are having a wonderful time in your wonderfully exciting lives. That came off sarcastic, but I really do hope you guys are having a great time. Alright, I will see you next week, guys. Have a grand old time until then. Bye-bye.